So Bob Friday, I'm now the Chief AI Officer at Juniper, in addition to being the CTO of AID President. And as Sadira says, Mobility Field Day has always been this special event for us. So it's great to be back. You're part of the family, right? Wireless is a very small community. Networking is a very small community. And so it's been great to be working with you. You know, when Sujay and I left Cisco, it was kind of with the thesis that cloud was fundamentally a better way to maintain and develop software. And I think we've all found that that is true. I think the other thesis when we started Mist was around AI ops, that fundamentally we're moving from a paradigm of helping manage network elements to one to helping manage this client to cloud experience. And that was the other thesis of Mist. And what you see here is this is the same slide. This is my 5th mobility field day. I think besides the colors, this slide has not changed. I think you guys have seen this slide. How many people have seen this slide 5 times in a row now? Yes, Tom. But what has changed is we have been on the journey to build an AI solution that can manage and operate networks on par with IT human domain experts. Now, what has changed on this slide is really where are we at that journey? You know, since we've joined Juniper, we have basically extended Marvis across both wireless, wired, and route now. And when you look at the journey, this journey basically starts with data. And you know what people always say, you know, AI requires great data. You know, those who know me, I make this 1 barrel of wine a year. Great wine starts with great grape. Same with AI data. And what we're doing with the data here is we're really starting to extend the visibility of Marvis. And so what you're going to hear today is really how we're extending the visibility of Marvis out to Windows laptops. We're starting to bring this client's view of the network back into Marvis, right? And so that lets us start to answer questions with more granularity. Now let's take it down to what driver, if there's driver problems in this device, we now have visibility of what's going on from the client's view of the network. The next thing we're starting to do, we're starting to ingest data from outside the Juniper domain, right? This is sentiment analysis. This is starting to ingest data from if Windows is having a problem or Teams are having a problem. What we want to know is that because some service went down? Did AWS go down? Did Teams go down? So now we're starting to ingest data from outside the network to give us more visibility when there's a problem. You know, is it somewhere outside of our domain? So that's the big thing you're going to hear today is really what we're doing around the data side. On the perimeter side, this is fundamentally, and what we learned, amazingly, what we learned at Mist was even before we got to the AI ops, customers just appreciated the fact that we had data in the cloud, right? It was the first time that customers actually had visibility. You know, the same data we need to get to Marvis is actually the same data that any IT person needs to solve a problem. So this part of the architecture is really getting the data back to the cloud and into some format that we can apply some ML to it. And what you're going to see here new to us is basically we're starting to extend this to the Mist edge, right? This is the AWS outpost, right? When we have to put compute storage on site. You know, this is like that tunnel termination. This is the one last piece of the controller that people like, right? We moved almost all that controller to the cloud, except for the tunnel terminations. People still like to terminate the data plane on site. And so that's what allows the Mist edge to do that. And then the second big thing is really we're starting to bring the WAN into Marvis. And so you're going to start seeing more WAN data come back into the cloud for us now. Probably the third big thing is around this data science toolbox. You know, people will argue we all are using the same algorithms, right? There is no real magic here. The real magic here is the team. And you'll be hearing from Jishing here, who leads our data science team. And as Sujay says, we can all use the same algorithm, that you cannot replace the people. You know, what Mist is bringing to the table right now is over the 8 years, and the 8 years into the adventure. So now we have 8 years of experience, and we have probably the best data science team right now working on networking problems. And this is what you're seeing here right now. And probably the fourth piece is really around conversational interface. And this is what I tell you is around trust. You know, if you're going to build an AI solution that's going to do something on par with an IT, that AI solution has to gain the trust of the IT team. The IT team needs to be able to interact with that AI solution like it would a normal person, right? You want to be slacking. You want to feel like there's a human on the other side of that slack. And that's really what you're going to see around the conversational interface. And what you're going to see today is really how we extended that to full stack. 7 years ago, we started with the access point. Now you're going to see that go all the way from the client all the way to the cloud. And you're going to see that conversational interface start to interact with, if there's a problem, we can actually graph that all the way to the end. And finally, this is where the magic is, right? This is it being, okay, there's a problem. What are you going to do about it? Right? It's one thing to have observability. It's another thing to actually take action and actually do something about it. And this is where we are now starting to get to the point where if we find a bad cable, does the IT department trust Marvis now to issue that support ticket? There's plenty of things where we do take care of RM and we proactively take care of things in the background that people don't even know about. But there's other things where we actually have to have support tickets, right? Have to go replace a cable, an AP. This is really where the magic is starting to happen, is when you start to trust your AI ops, AI assistant solution to actually issue that support ticket like a human would do. And that's where we are on the journey right now. And we're just starting to begin to see that happen, right? We're at the verge of actually people actually trust Marvis to actually start issuing those support tickets as they would an IT person. Now, the only thing I would say, this is the toolbox. I'm a big believer in truth in advertising. So behind every one of these ML algorithms is something a user experiences, right? But the point of this slide is really, we're trying to build something that does something on par with a human, right? And this is Marvis. At the end of the day, this is what we're trying to make happen. Now, under the hood, this is all the stuff that Jixing can take care of, right? All this stuff, it takes all this stuff to actually do something on par with a human. And that's the point of this slide. It's not one magical algorithms. It's like your self-driving car. There's a whole bunch of things going under that hood to get that car to drive itself. This is probably the thing I am most proud of. And this thing I would claim we missed are the only ones in the industry. This is the one differentiated that Cisco, Aruba, no one else is doing. I would challenge you to go ask them. We actually use at Mist our customer success team, right? This thing is tied to the hip. Those guys go over support tickets every day because when you get to the cloud, that success team is a proxy for our biggest customers, right? That success team has visibility to every big customer network we are running right now. If you can make this success team happy, ultimately we're making our customers happy. And when I hired Jixing, it was the deal I made with him is like, hey, if you can get Marvis to answer 90% of support tickets, 80, 90, there's some number, a big number, that I'd go help them start another company or something. It's like, we're getting close there. So we're up like 75, 80%. We're almost to the point where Marvis can now answer 70-some% of all these support tickets coming into the support team. And the point of this is, in addition to having to build this real-time pipeline and all the other stuff, this is an organizational issue. This is the other thing, where you find out big companies can't do this. This is another reason Susan and I left Cisco, is because organizationally, you have to tie your data science team to your success team. If that makes sense. And what that results in is this. This is the journey we've been on, the Jixing team had been on, right? This represents how often Marvis was able to help the success team. How often was Marvis able to get the right answer, on these support tickets? And what you find is it took us probably a year just to figure out what data we needed, right? We had to get data back to the cloud. So once we got data back to the cloud, then the data science team could start working on it and actually making progress. And so this basically shows you where we are on the journey. And I would tell you, this is the one differentiation that we still hold. While we all have the same data science toolbox, no one else is eating their own dog food like we are. And until you do that, you will not get on this path. Until you actually tie your data science team to your customer success team, you're going to be spinning your wheels.
Right. One of the things that I don't think people appreciate is actually, the curve becomes harder every week When we solve a problem, teach Marvis how to solve that, then customers can self-serve within Marvis and solve that problem, or we've self-driven the problem out. And Jixing is going to talk about what self-driving networks mean and how do we do this. So what is the outcome of this? Why should customers care about this? Why are we so passionate about this one chart and graph? Let me tell you this one thing. In the last year or so, probably, through COVID and everything, our number of devices on our cloud has more than tripled, right? That means the number of customers, working off of the Mist cloud continues to sort of exponentially grow. Our incoming support tickets on our team, while our business has tripled, has barely budged, meaning less than 10% increase in our support tickets coming in from our customers. So I always say, if you think the product of Mist is awesome, the people of Mist are amazing, you still have not met the best part of Mist, which is our customer success team, because it is backed by AI and Jixing and team. Truly, this is why Bob is so passionate about the team structure, the organizational structure that large companies cannot, really build themselves around. Physically within the office of Mist, our customer success team sits at the epicenter of our office, because that is how important we believe AI can serve our customers. So with that, Jixing, let's take them to self-driving networks, please.
Yeah, thanks, Sudhir. And this is really the high-level architecture of Marvis. That explains the secret sauce, what Bob just described, why Marvis is getting better, what we build to really make Marvis getting better, day in and day out. If you see on one side, Marvis now is taking almost petabytes of data every day across the Wi-Fi, wired, and WAN, and the clients. And through this, you can see it's a hierarchical ML pipeline we build in the middle. So the key there I want to highlight is that rather than generating tons of the events and alerts, just telling you this device is down or not, Marvis really focused on the root cause of the problem. A simple example, rather than telling you AP is dropping packets, have Ethernet error, clients fail connection with that AP. Marvis really put them together, use some advanced AI ML technology to really tell you the root cause. It's the bad cable. Rather than give you like tens of the alerts and events, we all put them together, consolidate them into one action called the bad cable. So on the right side, you see what Marvis deliver, even given all of the complex work Marvis has doing across such big amount of data. But what we want to deliver to the customer is really simplistic. It's just some simple actions. The ultimate goal of Marvis is what we call the zero support ticket. In other words, we want Marvis to detect and remediate the network problems before any of the user complains to their IT team. So that's all about the self-driving actions we deliver. Only for the remaining network problems which are not in our control, or Marvis does not have the high confidence to take the action, we actually give user the detailed guidance and also the insights to help user really highly reduce the response time to, in terms of getting the root cause themselves. So I think still, I will keep to here, and our Sunanini is going to play a quick demo really about what is called a Marvis in action.
So what's the demo about? Right? Essentially, so far you heard Bob talk about Marvis and trust. You heard Sudhir and Bob talk about the efficacy of Marvis in answering questions. What we are going to unveil today is exactly what Marvis is thinking, what Marvis is looking at, what Marvis is literally watching when it's recommending an action or it's remediating your network automatically. So this is one of our large customers. Obviously, we're not going to share names, but trust me, it's a very well-known customer. And what you're seeing here is a blip on the capacity SLE. In the Wi-Fi world, as you know, we've come a long way from coverage designs. It's all about capacity. It's all about users connecting to the network, making sure they're getting the capacity that they need. What you're seeing here is when the day began, the capacity SLE for this customer at this large site with 2,000 users connecting to the network was at not a very good success rate, right? It kept dipping, and it actually reached that 79% number that you see. So what's happening in the back end? So Marvis is watching this trend, and Marvis is then trying to catch the anomaly that's driving the capacity to go down. Is it because of load? Is it because of interference, Wi-Fi, non-Wi-Fi? What is it? So here, for the first time, we're giving you what we call the AI logs of what Marvis is looking at, what Marvis is thinking, and more importantly, what Marvis is doing in the back end to remediate your network. So Jishank, if you want to talk about some of this.
Yeah, I think that this is, if you see here, is really, this is the full life cycle of the AI we talk about. It's starting from the monitoring, then the detection, the deep, right? Then it's really automated troubleshooting. We try to find the root cause of the problem as described. And now it comes to the action piece. Marvis is confident it's because of the interference. So Marvis try to change the channel. And finally, it's a very important piece. A lot of people forget or even miss in the AI is the validation. How do you know your action is really effective? So this monitor, detect, action, and validation, this builds the full life cycle, which is what we call, in the AI world, is the reinforcement learning. You have to continuously reinforce the AI is doing the right thing and continues getting better.
So what began as a 74% fail turned to a 97% success, even though when we had peak usage before the client count went down. And what we are trying to show you is it's not just magic that's happening behind the scenes. There's actual anomaly analysis that's saying this is not a frequent daily trend that happens. This is truly an anomaly where the capacity is dipping. And what is the process Marvis goes through to remediate that automatically for you? You had a question.
Yeah, my question was, how does Marvis knows when to take action? Like, how long does it watch the trends going down for? And then second question is related to that, for the validation process, how long does it perform the validation process for?
Very good questions. First, how does Marvis know? This is really the detection piece. We have built actually some neural network-based anomaly detection, which continuously monitor first the baseline of the site. It's not that easy for a lot of sites. There's seasonality, right? There's no client during the night. There's a busy client. So this graph is not flat. So first, we actually use the 30-day of the history data to build the memory of that site. But in addition, we also use the peer baseline because especially for new site or a site which have like a bigger fluctuation. So you have to borrow we actually use all of the sites from the same org, even the different companies which are in the same industry vector, to build this memory of each of the sites. Then we will compare in the live, we will compare, the real time, what is the current value compared with what the AI predicted value at this time of the day. Mm-hmm. That's the whole
So would we say though it's less than an hour though in terms of detecting an anomaly and then taking action on it?
So right now we're aggregating data on 10-minute buckets.
Yeah.
Right? This is like probably tens of minutes by the time there's an anomaly. Till you detect it that something's happening.
Yeah, I might have missed it, but
no. Sorry, the second question. The validation also happens at the same frequency. Okay. This is almost like every 10 minutes we decide whether there's anything wrong. Then the root cause analysis is almost instant. Then after that, if AI decides to take action, you will see actually the effect after the next 10 minutes.
So the key part is we're always baselining. We're always learning. It's not like when the anomaly started now, that's when I start learning and then I go back in time and look at data. Yeah. Every minute, every day of the week, every week of the month, we are learning. So if the anomaly trigger actually happens within minutes when we say, oh, look at my last week, look at yesterday, look at the day before, this trend wasn't happening. My capacity SE was pretty solid, but something happened. And that triggers the Marvis audit log saying, okay, this needs to be remediated. Yes.
So how does that baseline work for, let's say, a campus that does graduation once a year, where it's outside of that 30-day window? There's going to be a huge spike in, say, guest users that are coming on campus.
Great question. So,
yeah, that's a great question. That's where the peer comparison comes to the picture. If you see, this is the behavior, common behavior across all of the campus, right? Campus site. So when we look at one campus, it looks like a big anomaly. But when you really look at compare with its peers, then this is, even we don't know what's happening, but we know this as normal because there's no chance all of the network from this, all of the separate campus all showing the same dip at the same time. This is where the more data, the more customer we have, the more data we accumulate, the more intelligent this AI engine.
Yeah, the one thing I might add to this thing there is the one thing I have found with the one thing that's changed, we know what the convolution networks did for image detection, right? That just changed the whole world on how we could do. In our networking world, these LSTM networks have changed the anomaly detection game to be much more accurate. So to that problem, these LSTM networks are predicting both also what the next 10 minutes should be. It's also predicting the confidence interval. And that's what's getting the low false positives now, because we're predicting two things now. We're not just predicting what we think the next 10 minutes should be as those graduates come into the network. We're also predicting what we think the anomaly confidence interval is. And that is why
baseline changes essentially.
And that is what's changing the game on this anomaly detection after 20 years, right? Is really these LSTM networks are really making a difference for networking.
Marvis saw the issue, triggered it, made a decision, and then you followed up with validation. Right. What if what Marvis did caused something else? Because you might have fixed the problem that you were trying to hit and caused something else at the same time. So how does it make this validation and still continue to watch other things?
That's also very good question. This is what we call the punish and reward in the reinforcement learning. You're totally right. AI is not always correct. That's the reason we very quickly iterate. It's not the key is not always make 100% correct decision. The key is iterate and validate and change. So that's the reason why SLE, this time series, like a real-time live, like monitoring of the network, continuous feedback to the model. That model knows whether it's making the change on the right direction or not, and change that.
Correct. And another point to add to that, Keith, is yes, we showed you the example of the capacity SLE. So the users who are experiencing a non-optimal capacity metric. But while Marvis is making that change, reacting to capacity, it's also looking at the other pre-connection, post-connection vectors. So it's not like because we fixed capacity here, we sort of impacted coverage or roaming. We look at that, or rather, Marvis looks at that in conjunction to the capacity to make sure that we're optimizing all the SLEs and not just the one we're focusing on, but we're remediating for the one that needs help.
I can't help but jump in.
Yes.
Because the other big change that happened, 20 years ago to airspace, we were trying to do this on AP to AP, right? We're trying to minimize interference of power and all this stuff. What has changed here is now we're doing these reinforcement that's looking at the user experience, right? And so that's probably the other big change that's happened. What I was doing in airspace, it was all about AP data. This is all, every data we start is the user experience. We're basically looking at the actual user connectivity experience. So in this case, we're looking at the asymmetry. As we start to screw around with things or change knobs, you're actually monitoring that user experience real time.
Across the board.
Right, and that's the reinforcement learning. So I guess if we turn the knob this way, hey, we all of a sudden see the users are getting worse, you turn the knob back.
Right,
thanks.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
At the beginning, you said you were starting to integrate third-party algorithms into this, right?
Data.
So how do you, so in terms of data, but how do you actually incorporate that and without gaining the expertise of that product or that knowledge that that third-party vendor has?
That's a great segue to the next slide. Thank you, Jisheng.
You're welcome.
Fantastic, I know. Nobody should know we spoke before though.
Yeah, no, we didn't. Seriously, we didn't.
This one, actually, this is another really very exciting, and I would say first time in the industry about applying the state-of-art graph technology into network industry solving complex problems. This diagram may remind you, this like an announcement 2 years ago, also in MFD, that we are the first vendor in the network industry that applying the state-of-art graph technology into solving, this client-to-cloud complex problem. This include, like you see here, a very large-scale distributed graph with billions of the node and edge we accumulate so far, and some of the cutting-edge graph ML models like graph neural network or not. So you may wonder, I think this is very exciting, and this becomes the foundation of our client-to-cloud troubleshooting. So you may wonder why we are so believing into this graph technology. We have been continuous like pushing the limit of this vision in the last 2 years with certainly additions every year. So it's just like Gartner said, AI ops, when you're talking, everyone is talking about AI ops, see how much data we collect, how many of the customer we have. It's not about how much amount of data you collect these days. It's about how you really connecting this data point, how you organize the data, how you digest the data, finally get to the root cause we talk about. And we believe, as you know, network itself by nature is a graph, right? It's a very high dimensional, fully connected graph. That's the reason we are very keen and we are really pioneering this graph technology into the networking. And certainly we also suggest, this is a very powerful weapon that every vendor needs to, leverage. So come back to your question. And really, we are very glad here. After 2 years, every year, the big step forward in this graph framework is to take in the third party. So the biggest value add, if you look at the right side of this client to cloud, because most of the Juniper and Mist deployment cover the LAN and the WAN part of your network. But a lot of the time with the SaaS application, the user experience problem can be very often caused by the service provider or the SaaS application itself, right? So the third-party data here really help us cover the last mile gap in Marvis in terms of this client-to-cloud vision. And you can see here, so the way we really consolidate is, we built that, if you remember that pipeline, that hierarchical data funnel we built with the streaming batch data processing. And we are it's the same pipeline we built for Wi-Fi, wide, WAN, and now third party. You can think that's really all of the magic happened. We consolidate all of the, all of this connectivity information with those events information, all of the data points through that funnel, and finally use some of the ML AI technology to get to that.
Make sure we answer. Does that kind of answer your question about the data source?
Yeah, so I get the data source, but the knowledge of what to do with it really exists in the vendor, and it's very hard to then, some of that knowledge is proprietary or, intellectual property. So how do you bring that into an AI?
So for us, our grounding, our foundation is the user experience. So what we care about from these third-party data sources is, how is that data point impacting my user? So when I'm doing a mean time to innocence of, okay, it's not the network, it's something else, I should be able to pinpoint what is that something else. And that's where the third-party data ingestion comes in. So we're not solving third-party issues, but we are trying to give you a full pipeline of root cause analysis proactively to say, hey, in the pipe of a client application going all the way to a cloud or a data center, where in the life of the packet did the connection fail?
Yeah, so
where in the life did the experience fail?
Yeah, so the data we're pulling in is really answers almost root causes. Like this is data, like Zoom will give us data that tells us why Zoom is having a problem. Or this is data we're getting from like a service provider or an AWS service, right? Where you want to know, is AWS up and running? Are we dealing with a cloud outage, which is not, so when someone has a problem, that's the type of data we're getting back from these third-party sources now.
Okay, that makes sense. So just a follow-on question, if I may. So one of the things that's really difficult to troubleshoot is when you have a multi-vendor environment, and you have a problem, who do you point the finger? And there's a lot of this going on. Is Marvis going to provide data that can help me prove that is this vendor's problem? And can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I would probably the best example is, DHCP, where you may have Infoblox, you may have a DHCP vendor, right? Or IP vendor, right? And so we know that the problem is there at that vendor at that point of the problem, or there's a DNS problem, right? So the goal is to basically extend Marvis's AI ops, right? It really doesn't care what's underneath it, whether it's Juniper, Cisco, or Arista. You're basically trying to get to the root cause of some element. And what you find is those elements may be, they may be all over the place, right? It may be the cloud provider, DNS, DHCP. There's all types of providers keep a network working.
And further to that point, apart from DHCP, DNS, Radius, ISP application, right, from a multi-net vendor network perspective, as much as we would like the entire stack to be Juniper, we know we're going to get into account before we convert them to full stack to have this wireless and something wired and something WAN, right? Even with that, with the APs plugging into third-party switching, we're still able to give you root cause identification in terms of bad cables or missing VLANs. So there's still indication. Obviously, we can't fix that for you because we don't control the multi-vendor network, but we can still identify the root cause for you. In fact, even on the WAN side, if all I have is wireless, I can still tell you if there are authentication issues. Is that because of something on the DHCP or on the Radius server? Or is it because of something changing on the WAN where the cert is not going through? And we had this actually happen when one of our large retailers when they deployed, where it's a multi-vendor network, it's a Cisco wired, it's a Cisco WAN, and they have missed wireless. They were having issues on the wireless. It clearly wasn't a wireless issue, so we wanted to give them the evidence of that. It was actually something on the WAN causing certain devices not being able to connect, but we were able to give them that indication, hey, the issues on the WAN side because the certs are not going to.
But that's why.
So that's where, again, it all ties back to the end user experience.
And that's why it gets back to the kind of this customer success, data science tied together. This third party effort is being driven by customers, right? You know, for Disney to get up to like 95%, you know, we've taken care of all the easy stuff, right? With wireless switch WAN.
Right.
Now it's down to, okay, what else? I want to get to 100%. Now I got to go outside to get to the next level of root causes.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I have a question from someone online. They asked how you would integrate with organizations that have strict change control. So if Marvis is recommending a change and then implementing the change, are you able to tie that into some sort of ticket system and then have a manual approval and then have Marvis integrate that change?
Great question. So Marvis today, all the actions actually do tie into a ticketing platform. So it depends on, again, goes back to trust, as Bob was saying. Do you trust Marvis to make the change for you, or do you just want Marvis to identify the issue and then open the ticket for you and let the admin take the action, right? So you have, if it's a Juniper network where Marvis can make the config change, for example, again, a missing VLAN, a negotiation mismatch, Marvis will ask you, hey, here's the issue I found. It'll create what we call an AI ticket for you. It can then create a webhook alert into your ticketing platform like a ServiceNow or whatever you may have via APIs. And then it's totally up to you where you say, hey, Marvis, go fix it. And Marvis talks to configuration and enables that workflow, or the admin goes to a change control window and does the action. So a lot of these things that impact data plane, like a missing VLAN or like a negotiation mismatch or other things, are admin-led, admin-authorized. So, but like an RM or a capacity SLE, that Marvis will automate it because there's no action to be taken, but it's a network config that Marvis can look at and take action on automatically.
Yeah, the other point, sorry, I just want to add here is that really we want to put a man in the middle for the AI, because this is really the feedback we talk about, right? Whether user really takes the action as Marvis suggested, or user tell Marvis, no, it's because some of the special setting in this store, this is the false positive from Marvis. This actually is the most valuable feedback we actually collect through this man in the middle AI process.
Yeah, I had a question for the third party, like you getting data from ISP and cloud providers. Is that something that you guys do in the backend? So you connect with Zoom and Teams and ISPs, or is it something that we have to configure as the network operator to tell you guys we're using that ISP, that service? Like, how do you guys handle all of that data ingest?
So in short, the answer is we learn, right? We learn your application, we learn the destination. And again, if you have the SD-WAN piece as well, we know the circuits, we know the provider. So we can get that intelligence ourselves. What we do ask you though, based on certain use cases, which applications do you care about? Do you care about the guest user traffic that's doing YouTube videos and hogging your network? Or do you care about your SaaS apps, your Office 365, your Salesforce, etc., that you want us to put more focus on and optimize for? And then that's where we'll build the bridge. But the integrations happen in the back end based on what we learn automatically.
Yeah, you don't have to config. Give you one example, service provider, right? from the IP, we know what the SM and which service provider you use.
Like any country in the world, you know that?
No. I started with the US, but we are
Okay.
expecting.
So let's go into the demo. But great question. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this one essentially we are integrating with the sentiment analysis tool, looking at all the ISPs, and we are asking that same question. Hey, what's happening with my team call, right? So here Marvis is looking at exactly which team calls, which session you're interested in, and it's now showing you the end-to-end view of not only just wireless wired WAN, you already heard about that, it's looking at the actual ISP linkage as well, right? And I'll tell you at each step of the way what exactly is the problem. Is it a wireless problem? Is it a WAN problem? Or it's actually ISP unreachability. So here we figured out it's an AT&T circuit, and we're giving you the health of the AT&T circuit as part of our third-party integration. That's how intelligent Marvis is becoming.
It's nice.
Because this is really the power here is a single pane of glass. You have really the client to cloud of your whole network troubleshooting within this small like a conversational assistant.
So we could think of, if we think about the API, we could have a system where Marvis opens a ticket with a service provider automatically on our behalf.
Potentially someday, yes. But we don't want the SPs to hate us either. But on that note of data integration, Roel, sorry, last question.
On the third-party integration, do you have a set of requirements for third-party integration, or is there some sort of initiative to standardize what type of data you would ingest, like shared data, that way it's more standardized across all third-party devices?
We are at the mercy of what the tools provide. So we look for the data set that we need. Like the first one is just availability, and then we use that, and that every vendor has that, right? So as we expand potentially, yes, but right now just, hey, is the service available? Pull that in and then use that in Marvis. But talking about third party.
So Lini, if I could just add
Absolutely.
to that, I think the whole notion, Roel and Francois here, is that we do not want users to have to know what they need to integrate. That's the whole point here. That's why we are saying third-party integration, where we're going to learn and continue to make it better with zero user configuration required. That's the initiative here. Truly, we want to make sure, if you go back to that client to cloud, the last picture, today, no vendor, literally zero vendors, not Cisco, Aruba, Meraki, Aerohive, Arista, nobody can show you and connect the dots across Wi-Fi, switching, SD-WAN, and application, including now with this third-party integration, the ISP services. This is where all of the AI mumbo jumbo we're talking about is coming to life, and we don't want the user to have to know and configure. Right. And Francois, to your point, yes, we're starting with some US service provider integrations, but going forward or learning, not integration. But the idea of this is that the user doesn't have to lift a finger.
So if you look at it here, I think we are running over time. Just the last comment. It's really, if you think of the backend, these are billions of the node and edge graph we keep. But what we want to finally deliver to the user is just that simple like interface for trouble. So this is the true power of what the AI should bring to the real world.
And you'll hear us talk a lot more about the conversational assistant, how it's truly helping operations team across the world, across all verticals, and becoming the best friend. It's all about making that network operation simpler. But talking about third-party data ingestion, we've also got a new announcement around expanding our location-enabled Marvis client, now also serving the needs for Windows laptops. So we have now made available a Windows client SDK that can get telemetry information from Windows devices, Windows 10, Windows 11, and answer the two key questions that always come up. Hey, is the driver the problem when a device is not able to connect the network of having a bad experience? Yes.
How quickly does it pull, or like how quickly is the
It's constantly sending data to the cloud, so it's almost every second.
Okay.
Yeah. So the two key things that we try to solve, again, data is data, but the question is what action can I drive from it? So the two key actions we're trying to drive from it is, how is the client driver itself contributing to the client's ability to connect on the network or roam the network? And therefore, how is the roaming? Right? Today, we do an awesome job of looking at the roaming and classifying a sticky client or a slow roam based on what we see as telemetry data coming from the APs. We are now able to get higher efficacy and even more granular on that front of a successful roam or even coverage holes by getting that data directly from the client. So not only do we do Androids and Zebra devices, we are now announcing the Windows client as well. So just a brief demo of this. So now in the Mist portal, and if you all would like to try it out, let us know. We'll make it available for you. It's a Windows APK that can get pushed by your MDMs onto your laptops like any other application. Once it's there, it starts working automatically. It makes a connection to the Juniper Mist cloud, sends information. So now when you go to Client Insights, you will be able to see the RSI, not just from a network perspective, but also from a client view perspective. And that is where the symmetry comes into play. Yes, Sam.
Is that agnostic to the client connecting to any Mist network, or is that specific to your Mist network? Like if I go and visit another organization that happens to have Mist, and I have this agent loaded on my laptop, are they going to get the benefit, or am I going to get the benefit?
Your network will get the benefit. So because we don't want to make a successful authentication with your organization where you are predominantly using that device.
Okay, so organization specific.
Organization specific, yeah. Otherwise, there'll be some security implications.
That's sort of where I was going, yeah.
No, it's organization specific, yeah. So the key part here again was we already have the roaming data that you may have seen on the client insights from Marvis queries about how is the client roam experience. We are now getting higher efficacy, even more granularity, because we are able to now merge that with the data set coming from the client, Android and Windows. We see this as a huge thing, especially in higher ed, where there are a lot of Windows devices. Even in the enterprise space, we keep hearing a customer say, hey, can you please tell me, do I need to update the driver on my corporate devices? Exactly, I see the rolling eyes. And we're like, we have to solve that problem. Now we can. And again, it's all about third-party data. It's any device out there, any Windows device, Windows 10 or 11, any Android device, we have the information. Yes, Keith.
You'd mentioned, to answer Sam's question about the organization specific, this data you're collecting from organization A could be very beneficial to organization B, even though they don't have the clients. Is there any mechanism to have that learning take place across the entire Mist board?
From an anonymization, absolutely. So once we learn certain device types, certain drivers, we can then make a recommendation. And this is the start of that journey to say, how can I give my customers benefit of what I've learned in certain orgs? So if certain OSs, certain drivers are not behaving properly, that could be a proactive recommendation from Marvis saying, just be aware, this is what we've seen. So absolutely, but anonymous.
And Keith, what we do today already when it comes to, cross organization is, we are studying and learning devices by device types and their RF behavior, RSSIs, at what RSSI, what MCS rates hold, all this kind of stuff. And when we are doing this predictive notion of when how much performance can I get from a user at a given RSSI, at a given, set of vectors, that learning we anonymize and learn, across device types, across organizations. We know how an iPhone 10 behaves given the ambient RF parameters, right? So there is the mechanism exists. More of it could be done when we add the Marvis client to it.
I would say a good example is this, Apple released an OS version that broke all the portal pages when you downloaded the large disclaimer thing. That's type of global information that, okay, guys, heads up, everyone. We know there's a problem. We have visibility across all Android. I mean, we know how much better Apple is versus Android on BLE, right?
And Bob, we do this for location anyway, right?
Right.
We use a global machine learned value across all orgs for devices. So. Yes, Joel.
Is there a special license for each device that you have to add, or is it just with one specific Marvis license?
If you have Marvis, you have this. If you don't have Marvis, let's talk to see how we get you Marvis.
So you had highlighted the driver issues with the Windows SDK. Is there also an integration that shows, or does it highlight that driver problem is having a problem with specific features, like this driver works with networks that have, or doesn't work with networks that have K enabled, but does with it disabled?
We are, I would say, in that learning journey, we want to start getting the data first before we get to the analysis, but that's a good point, is what I would say, yeah.
I would say to some extent that's kind of built into our mutual information.
Yeah.
So there are cases where, like Zebra devices, where we have basically isolated that there's a connectivity problem, and we get it down to a particular OS. You know, that's
But
kind
now
of the
the
standard.
scope is even feature,
Yeah.
which we will then evolve to. All right. So now, so we talked about the Windows client. We talked about the AI audit log innovation as part of our Marvis journey. Let's get on to the second category that you saw in terms of new Marvis enhancements. The enhancements we've done in line with our EX4100, what we call experience the unexpected launch, is all about highlighting wired issues that do impact wireless users, right? Now, every time I talk about wired problems, I see people like just zoning out. They're like, it's a switch, it's an access, it's just a power source. How does it matter? Trust me, my friends, wired issues happen all the time. You just don't know about it. But they show up as wireless issues. And that's when you're like, okay, what do I do now? Packet captures, it's not a wireless problem. To your point, fingers go like this, right? So what was our goal here? Our goal with Marvis again was, if it's a Juniper stack, I get a lot more information. I can give you a lot more wired actions. If it's not a Juniper wired stack, it's a third-party stack, I can still give you some indication of what's the problem that, again, is impacting a wireless user. So let's go into what we call Marvis wired actions. Some of this you've heard before. You all heard about bad cables. You all heard about missing VLANs. Those are common to both Juniper networks and third-party switches. So when you're running a heterogeneous network, Marvis is still your friend to tell you, hey, this set of wireless users is being impacted because of these wired issues in a third-party wired network. But if you have a full Juniper stack, now we can tell you port flapping issues. Now we can highlight where the loop is starting. Do loops still happen in the wired network? No, right? You would think? Show of hands.
Never.
There you go. So exactly, right? So, and we have been like saying we have all this data. We should be able to help network operators identify proactively, hey, there's a loop in the network and it's starting at this port. We won't take the action, but the first step that we've taken in that journey is to identify where the loop is starting, because that is what takes hours and hours, and Sudhir can himself vouch for, in certain cases, days to figure out what is going on. So again, in terms of Marvis actions, right? So this is our Juniper network Sunnyvale campus. You can see all the switches there. The key point, again, take it back to user experience. What we are looking at, not just the thousands of switches you see here, what we are getting telemetry from is every port, every few minutes, as well as asynchronous events. So now using that telemetry information, we're able to give you pre-connection, post-connection metrics, even on the wired side, whether it's a wired only user or it's the wireless user at the end of a Juniper missed access point plugged into a Juniper switch. But it's telemetry coming from 50,000 ports, not 1,000 switches. That's the first point, right? Again, the focus is on the user. With that telemetry, now what can we do? So what you'll see here essentially is our ability to ingest that data. And then we'll go into what we do with this telemetry information coming into the Mist cloud. So you have all these switches connected. You have 1,000 switches just in the Sunnyvale campus. You have 50,000 live hot ports. And now let's get into what has Marvis found proactively and creating tickets for the Juniper IT team right now when they find issues. So all of these Marvis actions you see are actually happening on a live network where Sujay has just gone to present our QBR to Rami, our CEO. Right? So the first thing is, again, you're all familiar with bad cables, so I won't gloss over it, but this is something that nobody ever thinks is a problem. And I can't tell you how many times we've just gone into a POC, Marvis within a couple of hours called it a bad cable, and the customer goes, you know what, with the previous vendor, users were complaining on the wireless network, and I just didn't know what the problem was. It was as simple, allegedly simple a thing as a bad cable. But now we have the proof. If Marvis says it's a bad cable, take it to the bank. It's a bad cable. Just send the tech out, replace the cable, and you're done. Right? But in addition to bad cable, and Abhi, thank you for joining. I would invite you here to the stage. Abhi is one of the key reasons why we have so many learnings on Marvis for the wired network. So Abhi, thank you for your contribution. But in addition to bad cable, the next one is port flap. Now, does port flap happen in any of your wired networks? All the time? Thank you. It could be client driven, right? But the whole goal for us again is using Marvis, using AI ML in the backend to baseline every port. If it's a typical trend where the port flaps certain hour of the day, certain day of the week, but that's just when the client authenticates, ignore it. But if it's anomalous port flapping, what we will do, Marvis will proactively call out exactly what port is flapping and give the administrator, again, to your point, are we going to automatically disable it or ask the admin? In this case, we ask the admin to say, hey, you have the option to disable the port because we are telling you this is anomalous. This is not part of the typical baseline trend. Anything to add on this one?
Most times, these are devices which are misconfigured, probably. Probably a card reader that's sitting there, which probably needs a 10-half, but you configure it as auto, and then you need, it probably is continuously looping. And these are elements that we can find out. These are headless devices that don't talk. We tell you this is where the problems are.
Now let's get to our favorite loop detected. Like we all agreed, these happen all the time. And it's always, to say the least, a hair-pulling exercise to figure out where the loop is happening. So we are early on in the journey for loop detection. What we have been able to get to is a high efficacy of detecting where the loop started. No action yet. It's more like a driver assist mode to let the admin know so that they are not working with thousands of other people trying to figure out every port, every switch, and try to isolate the issue. We help isolate the origin of the issue in driver assist mode as part of our AI ML Marvis action framework, but we would like the admin to take that next step of what to do once we highlight the source. Anything else to add to this?
Yeah, it's a good starting point. There's a lot more that will come through as a part of the loop detection. Trying to identify what port that went up, what commit that caused the issue, things of that nature.
Now the even more critical. Whenever an issue happens on a wireless user or a wired user, it's always a network problem, right? It's not a client problem. Can never be a client problem. We know that's not true. Whether it's a driver issue on the wireless side or it's a bad cert on a wired device or a wireless device, how do we qualify that? How do we identify that? How do we then notify you proactively? So we have been doing persistently failing client identification for the wireless users earlier this year. We have now added that same capability on the wired side as well. So if a wired client comes on and the cert is expired, we will notify you because Marvis knows. Marvis can see this client is in distress. Marvis can see the scope of other clients connecting to the network, wired or wirelessly, look at the switch ports, look at the APs and say, no, it's not the AP, it's not the switch, it's not, these are the VLANs, it's this particular client, a set of clients, and highlight it is a client specific issue on the wired side and due to what reason.
One of the side effects of a persistently failing client, a client that has a bad cert or probably does not have the MAC address in your database, is it continuously is going to hammer your Radius server. You want to know about these clients. Again, headless devices that don't complain. You want to be able to go and look at amongst all of your, gazillions of sites, which, and Marvis Action has always been org-based, right? Amongst your, in this example, the Juniper networks, we spoke 50,000 ports. We are speaking about those 6 persistently failing clients. And in our customers, the scope just continues to increase because of the size of the scale that we have. So very, very helpful in terms of reducing the impact on your Radius servers and also identifying which devices that can't speak cannot open tickets to be identified.
And last but not least, go ahead, Robert.
In the troubleshooting of cables, do you also troubleshoot fiber or potential bad SFPs?
Optics.
We do. We actually send out alerting for bad optics. Juniper inherently has an ability to identify bad optics and send out alerting as well. Yeah, absolutely present.
So the question was, those who didn't hear, do we also, as part of bad cable, identify bad optics? The answer is yes, we do. So I do want to get to the last enhancements on Marvis as of today. Tomorrow may be a different day, another new innovation Jisheng will come up with. Thank you, Jisheng. But the last piece is we talked about the client side issue of figuring out DHCP problems or authentication problems. We've also expanded our authentication action from wireless to wired. So now, if it's a DHCP or .1x problem on the server side, we have added the switch scope, the VLAN scope, so we can tell you exactly which VLAN is getting impacted. Therefore, all users on that VLAN are getting impacted, or which clients on a particular switch are having a problem because of what DHCP server or what Radius server is not responding to requests. So it's again a client-side view and a server-side view with switches and access points. So you know again the exact funnel of a certain device connecting to a network and where exactly is the blockage happening. So no more again finger pointing. Marvis has data from both sides. It puts it together, learns it, and gives you a ticket to look at. But not just say, hey, you have a problem, tell you where exactly the problem is. So you know exactly where to escalate to the DHCP team, the .1X team, or the mobile device team. And with that, we go on to our next slide. So the next enhancement was, you've all heard about conversational assistant. You all heard about, and you've all seen the Bob's unhappy, why is that use case. Marvis has come, or the Marvis conversational assistant has come a long way since then, right? We started our journey in wireless. We then went to wired. Last year and early this year, we've been busy with WAN. And then you just saw Jisheng talk about the third-party data ingestion, where we can now look at ISP reachability as a journey to looking at the application experience. Great information, but how do we make this easy to consume for a level 1 help desk when that first trouble ticket comes in? Do they need to go look at SLEs? Do they need to go escalate every wireless ticket to a tag 3? Show of hands, you guys tell me, when a wireless ticket comes in today, how much of those wireless tickets are escalations to tag 3? 10%, 20%, or almost 100%?
100.
Can we say it depends?
Yes.
You mean missed it 0, everybody else is 100%? You can say that, Sam, that's fine. No, but honestly, like our experience with working with our customers has always been that every wireless ticket by default, the ticket gets opened, either no action is taken or it gets escalated, because wireless is wireless, I don't know what's happening, right? So that's the first problem we tried to solve with Marvis Conversational Assistant. But we know, even if it's wireless is not the culprit for an end user, it could be wired, it could be WAN, it could be ISP, it could be application. So what are we doing with the Marvis Conversational Assistant to make the help desk experience not only better, but more impactful? Because end of the day, what happens, the faster they're able to root cause the issue proactively, the faster your user experience is restored back to normal. And that's what we care about, that end user experience, right? So in this view, and I'm going to go through it a little bit fast, you're essentially going to see how we start the conversation with Marvis, and try this out in your networks if you have a missed account. This is a production network. You can now go in and ask Marvis to troubleshoot a wireless user. You can ask Marvis to troubleshoot a wired switch. You can ask Marvis to troubleshoot a wired client, and it'll tell you exactly for every domain what is the problem, right? So here I looked at wireless, it's telling me slow association, it's telling me low power, it's telling me limited capacity, and then RM will kick in and solve those problems. Now I'm even saying, hey, go troubleshoot a switch for me, Marvis, because I'm getting some wired issues being reported to me. So imagine your level 1 help desk user does not need any training, any certification, and no networks 404, not just 101, but is able to get the answers literally at their fingertips of what's impacting the end user experience. So here on the wired, on the switch side, you can see exactly what it's showing you. It talks about troubleshooting switches. You can now see it's also going towards the WAN edges. So if all you have is the wired network, or if all you have is the WAN network, I often get this question asked that, hey, Sonalini, Marvis is great, but what if I don't have the full stack? What if I only have wireless? Or what if I only have wired? Or what if I only have WAN? Is Marvis still useful? Absolutely, yes. Yes, question.
Any plan to have Marvis Conversational Assistant in other language in English?
A plan? Yes, absolutely. So you will hear from us later this year in how we are localizing the dashboard itself in other languages. And then following that will also become the Marvis roadmap. And Tom, so we talked about how it's not, the one thing I want to say is, and we were having the discussion yesterday with Bob as to how should we talk about this? Because whenever you say CI, you will have every other vendor talk about chatbots, right? What does a chatbot do? A chatbot answers simple questions, documentation, or it'll point you to here's a list of FAQs, choose your answer, right? It's not truly conversational. It has zero context on your problems. And this is where the Marvis conversational assistant, and we truly call it an assistant versus just a chatbot, it's truly the face of the Marvis AI engine. It's enabling to answer, as Bob says, very complex questions in a very simple manner, but there's a lot of work happening in the back end, right? All the baselining, all the machine learning, all the anomaly analysis, all of that is being concisely presented as, oh, you have a problem on this end, and this is a reactive workflow. Here's the reason why it's happening. Here's a recommendation. And also here's the scope. So it's giving you the evidence. It's giving you the scope of impact, and it's telling you exactly what to do if we can't fix it for you, what to do to fix it. So it's the full feedback loop of a question and answer with a recommendation across the full stack, wireless, wired, WAN.
How can you tell when in your conversation, how do you give negative feedback to the conversational engine? Because if I ask, I mean, I've asked several times, hey, show me interference into the CEO. And the answer is not what I'm looking for. How do you identify that that's not correct so you fix it?
Great point, right? So as Bob said, Marvis is not there at the 100% mark. It's probably there at the 75 to 80% mark. But after every Marvis query, we do ask you for a thumbs up, thumbs down, and we ask the user to give us input. That's the input we take back, saying exactly that. And that's why that's critical. I know it's annoying sometimes, but that is what we use to train the engine, saying, hey, you had the wrong answer. You may have had the data, but the answer was wrong. Or maybe we didn't have the data. So we then go back and train the model and pull the right data.